The phone wouldn't stop vibrating on the bench beside her. It buzzed against cold metal again and again while the courtroom clock clicked forward, loud enough to feel personal. The paper cup in her hand had gone cold. She hadn't touched it in minutes. Somewhere behind her, someone cleared their throat. Someone else shifted in their seat. She kept her eyes on the seal on the wall, breathing slow, counting it out like she had learned years ago. She raised her hand. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavy, not polite. The kind of quiet that comes when people realize the story they thought they knew is about to turn. 5 years earlier, she was sitting in her car outside a strip mall in South Carolina, watching rain slide down the windshield like it was trying to erase something. Her name was Marissa Cole, and she had learned the hard way that life could narrow without warning. She worked long hours then, bouncing between contract jobs because nothing permanent ever stuck. HR assistant, compliance analyst, temporary legal clerk. Titles that sounded solid until you looked too close. Her student loans were still there. Her rent kept rising. Her mother called every Sunday and tried not to ask if she was okay, which somehow made it worse. That afternoon, her phone rang while she was eating fries she didn't really want. A number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. She always did. Later, when she finally listened, the voice on the other end was calm, professional, and carried a final tone she couldn't argue with. There had been a misunderstanding. She needed to come down to the station to clear it up. Just routine questions. Marissa sat there longer than she meant to. She knew better than to believe words like routine. Still, she told herself it was probably nothing. She had done nothing wrong. She had built her life on being careful. The station smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. The lights were too bright, buzzing softly. Time stretched in a way that made her chest feel tight. The questions didn't match the tone. The jokes didn't match the situation. Someone laughed. Someone else joined in. At some point, she stopped trying to explain and focused on staying calm. She watched a small clump of hair fall onto a white sink and thought, oddly, about how long it had taken her to grow it. No one touched her in a way that left marks. No one raised a hand. But the laughter stayed with her long after she left. It followed her home. It sat with her in the shower. It showed up when she tried to sleep. The charges were dropped. A mistake, they said. Paperwork issues. Nothing stuck. Nothing ever does, she learned, when no one wants to remember. But Marissa remembered. She cut her hair short after that, not as a statement, just because it felt easier. She stopped telling the story because people either got quiet or tried to explain it away. She moved to Maryland for work, then to Northern Virginia. She told herself she was starting over, even when she knew better. Her life became smaller but more controlled. Morning coffee from the same place. Commute at the same time. Work that stayed inside lines. She built walls so slowly she barely noticed them go up. Law school wasn't a dream. It was a calculation. She studied at night after work, sitting at her kitchen table with a lamp that flickered when the microwave ran. Some nights she cried from exhaustion. Other nights she felt nothing at all, which scared her more. She didn't tell many people what she was doing. She didn't want encouragement. She didn't want pressure. She just wanted out. Out of the feeling that the world could laugh while you disappeared. Out of the sense that dignity was something you had to earn back after it was taken. When she passed the bar, her mother cried quietly on the phone, like she didn't want to scare the moment away. Marissa smiled and stared at the wall, letting it sink in slowly. She didn't feel victorious. She felt steady. That felt better. The job offer came later. Administrative law. A path that made sense. Less spotlight. More structure. She learned the rhythm of hearings, the weight of silence, the power of listening without reacting. She learned that people revealed more when they thought you were just another face behind a bench. Some days, she drove home in silence. Other days, she turned the radio up loud just to remind herself she was still here. She never talked about South Carolina. Not at work. Not with friends. It stayed folded inside her like a letter she wasn't ready to open. Until the file crossed her desk. Same county. Same department. Different year. She felt it before she understood it. a tightening behind the ribs, a slow, familiar heat in her face. She read the names once, then again. The room felt smaller, like it had years ago under those lights. Marissa closed the folder and sat back, breathing through it. She wasn't the woman in the car anymore. She wasn't the one trying to be believed. But the past had a way of waiting. And now, it was sitting across from her, pretending not to recognize her. The first hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, the kind that blended into the week without ceremony. Marissa arrived early, like she always did. She set her bag down behind the bench, adjusted the microphone, and lined her papers into neat stacks even though she knew the order by memory. Outside the courtroom doors, voices rose and fell. Lawyers greeting each other. A clerk laughing at something on her phone. The world doing what it always did. Marissa kept her eyes on the case file until the last possible second. When the defendants entered, she felt it in her shoulders before she saw their faces. The way her muscles tightened, like they had learned something her mind was still catching up to. They looked older. Thicker around the middle. Less certain. But it was them. She didn't need names to know. They didn't recognize her. Or maybe they did and refused to place her. Either way, they took their seats without a glance in her direction. That should have been enough. That should have made it easy. Professional distance. Clear boundaries. Procedure over feeling. It didn't. During a recess, Marissa stepped into the hallway to get air. The coffee from earlier sat heavy in her stomach. She leaned against the wall and stared at a framed poster about courtroom conduct, the edges slightly curled from age. A woman stood nearby, holding a folder too tightly. Early 40s. Nervous eyes. She shifted her weight from foot to foot like she didn't know where to put herself. First time? The woman asked quietly. Marissa nodded before she thought about it. The woman smiled, small and tired. You get used to the waiting. The waiting's worse than the talking. Marissa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That's good to know. They stood there for a moment, not speaking. Then the woman glanced at Marissa's robe, her posture changing slightly. Respect mixed with something else. Hope, maybe. My brother's case, she said. Different courtroom. I just didn't want to sit alone. Marissa understood that more than she wanted to. She nodded again, this time on purpose. They talked about neutral things. The weather turning cold too early. Parking prices downtown. Nothing that required explanation. Nothing that asked for more than either of them could give. When the clerk called for the next session, the woman thanked her and walked away. Marissa watched her go, feeling something shift just a little. Not healing. Not relief. Just a reminder that everyone in that building carried something invisible. Back on the bench, the proceedings continued. Lawyers spoke. Arguments were made. Marissa listened. She asked questions that stayed inside the lines, even when her thoughts tried to wander. One of the officers glanced up at her when she spoke. Just once. His eyes flicked away quickly, like he'd touched something hot. That night, Marissa drove home in silence. She parked in her assigned spot and sat there longer than usual, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. The woman in the hallway stayed with her. So did the look on the officer's face, brief but unguarded. At home, she heated leftovers she barely tasted. Her apartment was clean in the way it always was, everything in its place, nothing personal left out. She sat on the couch and stared at the muted television, her mind moving faster than the images. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. She almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, she tapped the screen and held the phone to her ear. Her mother's voice filled the room, warm and careful. She talked about nothing important. A neighbor's new dog. A recipe she'd messed up. Then her tone shifted, just slightly. I know you don't like to talk about work, her mother said. But I hope you're being kind to yourself. Marissa closed her eyes. After the call ended, she stayed still, the phone resting against her chest. Kindness. It sounded simple. It felt foreign. The next hearing brought testimony. Procedures. Long pauses. The officers answered questions in the same practiced tone Marissa had heard years ago. Calm. Detached. Certain they were being reasonable. Marissa noticed small things. One man's knee bouncing under the table. Another clearing his throat too often. Details that didn't mean guilt or innocence, just humanity under pressure. During another break, the woman from the hallway appeared again. This time, she waved. They pushed his case back, she said with a shrug. Guess I'm here a while. Marissa hesitated, then gestured to the bench. You can sit. They didn't talk much. Just shared space. It felt grounding in a way Marissa hadn't expected. Like standing barefoot on solid ground after years of balancing. When court resumed, Marissa felt steadier. Not detached. Anchored. That night, she pulled out the old box from the back of her closet. The one she never opened. Inside were papers, notes, things she had told herself she didn't need anymore. She sat on the floor and went through them slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't rush. For the first time, she let herself remember without shrinking. Change didn't arrive like a wave. It came quietly, in moments that didn't announce themselves. A conversation in a hallway. A voicemail left with care. The simple act of sitting with discomfort instead of running from it. Marissa closed the box and slid it back into the closet, not hidden this time. Just stored. The case wasn't over. Neither was the past. But something had shifted. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone inside it. The morning everything cracked open, Marissa woke before her alarm. The room was still dark, the kind of quiet that made thoughts louder than they should be. She lay there staring at the ceiling fan, watching its shadow move slowly across the wall. Her chest felt tight, not from fear exactly, but from something closer to pressure. Like holding a breath too long. She got up anyway. The shower ran hot, steam fogging the mirror until her reflection disappeared. She stayed under the water longer than usual, letting it drum against her shoulders. For a moment, she imagined what it would feel like to walk into the day without knowing what waited on the other side. She turned the water off before the thought finished forming. At the courthouse, the energy was different. Subtle, but present. People spoke more quietly. Even the air felt heavier, like it knew something was coming. Marissa reviewed the file one more time, though there was nothing new to learn. She knew the arguments. She knew the law. What she didn't know was how to carry the space between who she had been and who she was now without letting either version take over. As the session began, one of the defense attorneys made a casual comment. Not about the case. About procedure. But the tone was familiar. Dismissive without being obvious. It slid into the room like it belonged there. Marissa felt it land. Her hand tightened around her pen. She kept her face neutral, eyes forward. No one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did and chose not to. As testimony continued, an officer described events from years ago. His words were clean, trimmed of anything that didn't support the narrative. He spoke with confidence, leaning back slightly, hands folded. Marissa listened. She told herself she was reacting because she cared about the integrity of the process. Because details mattered. Because justice was built on accuracy. But another truth pressed up beneath that one. She was tired of pretending this was abstract. When it was time to speak, her voice came out steady. She asked a question. Then another. Each one precise. Each one polite. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't accuse. She let the silence do the work. The officer hesitated. Just enough. In that pause, something broke loose inside her. Not anger. Not revenge. Recognition. She saw clearly how easy it would be to keep hiding behind professionalism. To stay neutral forever. To never acknowledge the weight she carried into that room. It would be safer. Cleaner. Applauded, even. But it would also mean accepting that what happened to her never mattered. Her mind raced, not with what she wanted to say, but with what it would cost to say anything at all. She thought about her mother's voicemail. About the woman in the hallway. About the years she spent shrinking herself so she could fit through doors that were never built for her. The courtroom felt very small. Marissa called for a brief recess. Behind closed doors, she sat alone, hands resting on her knees. The hum of the building filled the space. She focused on breathing in and out, grounding herself the way she had learned to do. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened glass of a framed certificate. She didn't look like the woman from the station anymore. She looked tired, focused, real. The realization settled in quietly. This wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't about exposing anyone for the sake of it. It was about refusing to erase herself from the process. When court resumed, Marissa returned to the bench with a different kind of calm. Not distance. Clarity. She addressed the room. Her words stayed within the law. They had to. But they carried something else too. A firmness that came from lived experience, even if she never named it. She emphasized accountability, the importance of respect, the weight of authority and the responsibility that came with it. As she spoke, she noticed the shift. A tightening of shoulders, eyes lifting, then dropping. The laughter from years ago had nowhere to go now. One of the officers looked at her fully this time. He knew. The recognition passed between them without words. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It sat there, undeniable. Marissa felt her throat tighten, but she kept going. She finished her remarks and moved on, like it was any other day. Like she hadn't just crossed an invisible line she could never step back over. When the session ended, she stayed seated while others filed out. Papers shuffled. Chairs scraped. The noise returned slowly, cautiously. The woman from the hallway caught her eye on the way out. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. A small thing. But it landed deep. Later, alone in her car, Marissa rested her forehead against the steering wheel. The engine was off. The world outside felt distant. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel whole. She felt honest. And that terrified her. Because honesty meant she couldn't keep pretending the past was separate from the present. It meant accepting that strength didn't come from silence alone. It came from choosing when to speak. Marissa straightened, started the car, and pulled out of the lot. The hardest part wasn't what she had done. It was knowing she would have to live openly with it now. And there was no going back. The final day of the trial didn't feel dramatic. There were no raised voices, no sharp turns. Just a slow, careful closing of a door that had been open far too long. Marissa arrived early again, the habit unchanged, but something in her posture was different. Lighter, maybe. Or just more honest. She drank her coffee this time while it was still warm. The courtroom filled the way it always did, with people carrying expectations that rarely matched reality. The officers took their seats. Lawyers shuffled papers. The clerk adjusted the microphone. All familiar. All ordinary. What wasn't ordinary was the silence. Not the polite kind. The kind that comes when people are paying attention. Marissa reviewed her notes one last time, then set them aside. She already knew what she needed to say. Not everything. Just enough. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but softer than before. She outlined the findings. The inconsistencies. The standards that had not been met. She didn't linger. She didn't editorialize. She didn't need to. The ruling landed without spectacle. There was no gasp. No outburst. Just the quiet sound of a process completing itself. For a brief moment, no one moved. One of the officers stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Another looked down at his hands. A third shifted in his seat, then stilled. The laughter that had once filled a tiled room had no place here. It couldn't survive scrutiny. Marissa felt it then. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Relief. Not because she had won anything, but because she had not lost herself in the process. When the courtroom cleared, the woman from the hallway lingered near the door. Her brother stood beside her, taller than Marissa expected, eyes tired but alert. "Thank you," the woman said quietly, "for listening." Marissa nodded. "That's part of the job." The woman hesitated. It meant more than that. Marissa let the word sit. She didn't correct her. She didn't explain. Sometimes meaning didn't need translation. Later that afternoon, Marissa returned to her office and closed the door. She sat at her desk without turning on the computer. Outside, traffic hummed. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed at something small and harmless. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. There was a voicemail she had been avoiding. Dated years ago. From herself. She had recorded it late one night during law school, after a particularly hard exam. She barely remembered doing it. Her own voice filled the room, younger, strained, but determined. If you're listening to this, the voice said, it means you made it through something you didn't think you could. Don't forget why you started. Don't forget who you are, even when it would be easier to disappear. Marissa felt her eyes sting. She didn't wipe them away. That evening, she went home and opened the windows, letting cold air rush through the apartment. She cooked a real meal. Nothing fancy. Just something warm. She ate at the table instead of the couch. Later, she stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself fully. The short hair. The lines at the corners of her eyes. The quiet strength she had earned without anyone's permission. She didn't feel healed. But she felt intact. The past didn't vanish. It never does. It became something else. A reference point. A reminder. Not a weight she had to carry every day, but a truth she no longer ran from. The next morning, she took the long way to work. Walked past a coffee shop where people sat with laptops and half-finished drinks. Life moving forward in small, unremarkable ways. She thought about how many people carried stories like hers. How many never found language for them. How many believed silence was the same thing as strength. She knew better now. Strength, she had learned, wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It showed up consistently, quietly, and refused to step aside when it mattered. As Marissa crossed the street, her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. Proud of you. Always have been. Marissa smiled to herself and kept walking. The world hadn't changed overnight. It probably never would. But she had. And sometimes, that was enough to start something real. If this story resonated with you, share what quiet strength looks like in your own life. Someone else might need to hear it today.